Good morning, church. Today I want to talk to you about a principle that can change your spiritual life, your relationships, and even your destiny. It's a principle that's counterintuitive to what we naturally want to do, but when we understand it, it shifts everything. When we prioritize God, He draws closer to us in ways we never expected. We see this pattern repeated throughout the Bible. Those who choose to step away from distractions and worldly pursuits to focus on Him always find themselves being pursued by His presence, His blessings, and His purpose. It's not that God doesn't love everyone, but there is a special intimacy reserved for those who actively seek Him above all else. Think about how relationships work. When someone constantly chases, begs for attention, or tries to force a connection, it often backfires. But when a person is secure in themselves, living with purpose, and not desperately seeking approval, they naturally become more attractive. The same is true in our relationship with God. When we are constantly striving, anxious, and trying to force things, we often feel spiritually exhausted. But when we shift our focus to simply dwelling in His presence, He starts moving in our lives in ways we never imagined. In the Bible, we are told to seek first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be added to us. This means that when we put Him first, when we disappear into His purpose, rather than chasing after what we think we need, He takes care of the rest. Too often people run after blessings, relationships, opportunities, and success, thinking those things will satisfy them. But God isn't found in the chase. He is found in the stillness, in the surrender, in the quiet trust that says, "Lord, I don't need to chase. I know You will bring to me what is meant for me." Moses wasn't chasing a grand destiny when God appeared to him. He was in the wilderness, minding his own business, tending sheep, living a quiet life, but God pursued him with a calling so great that it changed history. David wasn't looking for a throne. He was tending sheep in the field, but God sent a prophet to find him. Even Jesus, during His ministry, often withdrew to be alone with God, and every time He stepped back, people chased after Him. Crowds sought Him, miracles followed, and God's presence manifested in power. In the Bible, we are told that when we draw near to God, He draws near to us. But drawing near to God doesn't always mean striving harder or doing more. Sometimes it means stepping back from the noise, stepping away from the distractions, and simply abiding in Him. The moment we stop trying to force things and instead focus on seeking God above all else, He starts to move. His pursuit begins when we stop chasing and start resting in Him. This is the paradox of faith. When we disappear into His purpose, He makes sure we are never forgotten. When we focus on Him instead of seeking validation from the world, He lifts us up in ways we never saw coming. The question is, are we willing to step back and let Him take the lead? Seeking validation is something deeply ingrained in human nature. People want to be seen, acknowledged, and reassured that they matter. But the danger lies in placing that need for validation above everything else, especially above our relationship with God. When we constantly seek approval from others, whether through attention, recognition, or affirmation, we unknowingly push away not only people, but also the deeper blessings that God has in store for us. In the Bible, we are said that the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. This means that when we live for the opinions of others, we trap ourselves in a cycle of disappointment and exhaustion. The more we seek human approval, the emptier we feel. It is an endless chase because people's opinions are unstable. They change with time, emotions, and circumstances. But when we rest in the approval of God, we find peace, security, and full fulfillment that no human validation can provide. We see this truth play out in the story of Saul and David. Saul was a man who craved validation from people. He made decisions based on public opinion rather than obedience to God, and that cost him his kingdom. David, on the other hand, wasn't chasing validation. He was chasing after God's heart. Even when he was overlooked, rejected, and left in the fields while his brothers were considered for kingship, he didn't strive for attention, but because his focus was on God, the prophet was sent directly to him. He didn't have to fight for a position. God pursued him with favor. In the Bible, we are said that if we seek the praise of men, that will be our only reward. But when we seek God in secret, he rewards us openly. The moment we stop seeking validation from people and instead seek alignment with God, he begins to elevate us in ways we never imagined. Jesus himself lived by this principle. He never sought to impress people, prove himself, or gain their approval. In fact, he often withdrew from crowds, even when they wanted to make him king. He understood that his purpose wasn't tied to popularity, but to obedience. And because of that, God exalted him in the highest way possible. When we constantly chase after validation, we end up exhausted, frustrated, and unfulfilled. But when we step back and root ourselves in God's approval, everything changes. Instead of worrying about who sees us, we rest in the fact that God sees us. Instead of striving to be chosen by people, we trust that God has already chosen us. And when we do that, something powerful happens. God begins to open doors we never knocked on, bring the right people into our lives without force, and pour out blessings we didn't even ask for. What we were chasing starts to chase us, and that is the power of seeking him first. When you disappear into God's purpose, he elevates you in ways that human effort never could. Many people spend their lives striving, trying to be seen, trying to make things happen, trying to force opportunities that may not even be meant for them. But God does not operate through striving, he operates through surrender. The moment you shift your focus from being noticed to simply walking in his purpose, he begins to position you in places you never imagined. In the Bible, we are said that promotion does not come from the east or the west, but it is God who lifts one up and brings another down. This means that no amount of effort, networking, or self-promotion can accomplish what God can do in a single moment of divine favor. When you pour yourself into his calling instead of chasing recognition, he moves things behind the scenes that you could never orchestrate on your own. Joseph was not seeking a position in Pharaoh's palace. He was simply faithful in every season, whether in his father's house, in slavery, or in prison. He wasn't chasing status, yet God chased him down with purpose. From the pit to the palace, Joseph's life was a testimony that when you focus on being faithful where you are, God will elevate you when the time is right. He was not striving for power, yet power found him. David was anointed as king, yet he didn't rush to take the throne. He continued tending sheep, running errands for his father, and even serving the very king who was later threatened by his existence. He did not manipulate his way into his destiny, yet God orchestrated every step until the moment came when he was called forward. In the Bible, we are said that those who humble themselves will be exalted, but those who exalt themselves will be humbled. The ones who disappear into God's purpose always find themselves lifted by his hand. Even Jesus followed this principle. Though he was the Son of God, he did not seek to elevate himself. He moved in humility, often avoiding recognition and telling those he healed not to speak of him. Yet because he was faithful to the purpose for which he was sent, God lifted him above every name, giving him ultimate authority. His life shows that true greatness is not in striving for recognition, but in surrendering to God's plan. When you focus on your calling instead of trying to prove yourself, the right doors will open at the right time. You don't have to fight for what God has already assigned to you. What is meant for you will not miss you when you are aligned with his will. When you disappear into his purpose, you will find yourself walking in favor that you never had to chase. He will bring you into places you never imagined, with opportunities you never asked for, and his hand will be evident in every step. Faith often grows in silence. In a world that is constantly moving, talking, and demanding our attention, we sometimes forget that God works most powerfully when we are still. We want to be seen, heard, and acknowledged in every moment of our lives. Yet there is a deeper work that occurs when we step back, quiet our hearts, and trust in his plan. The world may celebrate the loud, the busy, and the active, but God often calls us to a different rhythm, a rhythm of quiet dependence on him. In the Bible, we are said that in quietness and trust is our strength. This verse teaches us that true power comes not from exerting our will or forcing our way, but from trusting that God is at work in the hidden places. When we stop striving and simply wait for his guidance, he often moves in ways that are far beyond our understanding. In the silence of our faith, God is shaping us, preparing us, and aligning us with his divine purpose. Think of Elijah. When he fled to the cave expecting to encounter God in a dramatic, earth-shaking way, he found God in a still, small voice. God did not speak in the fire, the wind, or the earthquake. Instead, it was in the quiet that Elijah experienced the power of God in a way that the noise of the world could never reveal. In the Bible, we are said that God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Sometimes the silence is an invitation to humble ourselves and recognize that we are not in control. It is in this place of humility that God reveals his power. Moses, too, spent 40 years in the wilderness alone with God. The wilderness was not a place of action, but a place of preparation. It was a time when Moses could learn to listen to God's voice without the distractions and noise of Egypt. During those years, God was forming his character and preparing him to lead the people of Israel. The most significant moments of Moses' life were often in moments of solitude, waiting, and trusting in God's timing. In the Bible, we are said that those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. It's in the quiet, when we stop trying to make things happen, that God renews us for the tasks ahead. Jesus himself often withdrew from the crowds to spend time in prayer. Even though he was the Son of God, he knew the importance of seeking God in solitude. He understood that the power he needed to fulfill his mission did not come from human effort, but from the quiet moments of communion with the Father. It is in the silence of these moments that we find the strength to face the demands of life. When we learn to embrace the quiet, we also learn to trust God's process. In a world that demands constant activity and results, it can be difficult to understand that sometimes the best thing we can do is wait. But in the waiting, God is preparing us. He is refining our character, deepening our faith, and aligning us with his will. The silence is not a sign of inactivity, but a place where God works in ways we cannot see, shaping us for the purpose he has designed for our lives. Waiting isn't weakness, it's wisdom. In a world that glorifies instant results and quick action, the idea of waiting can feel frustrating and even discouraging. People often associate waiting with inactivity, as if it means nothing is happening. But waiting on God is not passive. It is one of the greatest acts of faith. It is in the waiting that God works, refines, and prepares us for what is to come. Many times, the delay is not a denial, but a divine setup for something greater than we imagined. In the Bible, we are said that those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. Waiting is not about wasting time. It is about being renewed. It is in the waiting that God strengthens our faith, purifies our motives, and teaches us to rely on him rather than our own understanding. When we rush ahead of God, we risk stepping into something that we are not yet prepared for. But when we trust his timing, we receive his best, not just what is available in the moment. Abraham was given a promise that he would become the father of many nations, yet he had to wait for years before seeing even the first part of that promise fulfilled. In the waiting, he had moments of doubt, moments where he tried to take matters into his own hands, but God remained faithful. The fulfillment of the promise did not come when Abraham thought it should, but it came at the perfect time, in the way that God had ordained. In the Bible, we are said that God is not slow in keeping his promises, but he works with perfect patience. What looks like a delay to us is often God aligning everything perfectly. Joseph was given dreams of greatness, yet he spent years in slavery and prison before stepping into his destiny. If he had fought to rush the process, he would not have been ready to handle the weight of leadership. But in the waiting, God developed his character, strengthened his resilience, and positioned him for the moment when Pharaoh would call him forward. The waiting was not wasted time, it was preparation for elevation. Even Jesus, though he was the Son of God, did not begin his ministry immediately. He waited for the appointed time, growing in wisdom and favor until the moment came when he stepped into his calling. In the Bible, we are said that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. The waiting season is not a mistake. It is part of God's divine order. Many people give up too soon because they mistake waiting for inaction. But the truth is, some of the most powerful moves of God happen in seasons of stillness. When we learn to embrace waiting as wisdom rather than weakness, we position ourselves for the fullness of what God has in store. What we think is a delay is often the hand of God working behind the scenes, setting the stage for something greater than we could ever imagine. God's pursuit is about alignment, not demand. Many people think that if they just pray harder, do more, or try to be perfect, they will force God's hand to move in their lives. But God is not looking for performance. He is looking for alignment. When we align ourselves with His will, His blessings naturally flow. It is not about demanding things from Him, but about positioning ourselves in a way that allows Him to work. In the Bible, we are said that if we remain in Him and His words remain in us, we can ask whatever we desire and it will be done for us. This is not a formula for getting whatever we want, but a reminder that when our hearts are fully surrendered to God, our desires begin to reflect His desires. We stop praying for things that only serve us, and we start longing for what truly glorifies Him. When our will aligns with His, we find ourselves walking in His favor effortlessly, not because we begged for it, but because we are in the right place spiritually. Look at the life of Esther. She didn't force her way into a position of influence. She aligned herself with God's plan, and He positioned her in the palace at the perfect time to save her people. She could have demanded that God use her immediately, but instead she prepared, waited, and followed His leading. In the Bible, we are said that God orders the steps of the righteous. Esther did not need to chase the opportunity. She needed only to be aligned, and God made sure she was exactly where she needed to be. Peter experienced this as well. He spent an entire night fishing with no results. But when Jesus told him to cast his net again in the same waters where he had found nothing, Peter obeyed. This time his nets overflowed. The difference was not in how hard he worked, but in his obedience to the right timing and the right instruction. He didn't need to demand a blessing. He simply needed to align with the word of Jesus, and the blessing found him. In the Bible, we are said that obedience is better than sacrifice. It is not about how much effort we put in, but about how willing we are to follow God's lead. Even Jesus demonstrated alignment over demand. He did not force His own will, but surrendered to the will of the Father. Before the cross, He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." That moment of alignment changed everything. It brought salvation to humanity, proving that true power is found in surrender, not in control. When we stop striving and start aligning, we position ourselves for God to move. Instead of chasing blessings, we attract them. Instead of forcing doors open, we walk through the ones He opens. What we seek begins to seek us, not because we fought for it, but because we made room for God to do what only He can do. True fulfillment comes when we stop chasing and start trusting. The world teaches that the more we strive, the more we achieve, and the more we pursue, the more we gain. But in God's kingdom, things work differently. The greatest breakthroughs often come when we let go and allow Him to lead. When we release our need for control and trust His plan, we find that what we were chasing was never meant to be pursued, it was meant to be received. In the Bible, we are said that those who trust in the Lord will be like a tree planted by the waters, whose roots go deep and never fear the heat or drought. A tree does not chase after water, it simply remains rooted, and because of that, it flourishes. When we are deeply rooted in God, we do not have to strive for every opportunity, fight for recognition, or run after validation. He provides exactly what we need at the right time. Trusting in Him removes the anxiety of constantly feeling like we are missing out or falling behind. Ruth did not chase a better life. She simply remained faithful where she was. She followed Naomi, worked in the fields, and focused on what was in front of her. She did not scheme to find a husband, position herself to be noticed, or fight for favor. Yet because she was faithful and trusted God's plan, she found herself at the center of a divine setup. In the Bible, we are said that when we commit our ways to the Lord, He will establish our steps. Ruth's blessing found her because she walked in faithfulness rather than chasing after what she thought she needed. The prodigal son chased after success, wealth, and freedom, thinking that fulfillment could be found in independence and self-sufficiency. But after losing everything, he realized that what he had been searching for had always been in his father's house. When he returned home, expecting only to be tolerated, he was instead embraced, restored, and given more than he ever had before. In the Bible, we are said that when we seek first the kingdom of God, everything else will be added to us. The things we desire are never found in the chase, they are found in the presence of the Father. Jesus never chased after influence, recognition, or approval, yet people followed him wherever he went. He did not strive to build a platform or prove his power, yet his name became the name above all names. He walked in trust, in obedience, and in surrender, and because of that, everything he needed came to him. In the Bible, we are said that the Lord is our shepherd, and we lack nothing. When we stop running after things and instead rest in him, he ensures that we are never in need. Trusting God removes the burden of striving and allows us to receive what he has already prepared for us. What we were chasing was already on its way. It was just waiting for us to stop running and stand still in faith.